I think we don't know. I wouldn't expect countries to preemptively lower their tariffs. I think because of some uncertainty as to what exactly those reciprocal tariffs will look like, what they will count, and how they'll be implemented. And so if countries were to lower their tariffs today before those actions were taken, it would really be negotiating against themselves and trying to predict something that's just unpredictable right now. They don't know exactly what will come out of the Trump administration and those reciprocal tariff actions that they've discussed.
Well, it'll be interesting to hear how Donald Trump frames this tonight. We've heard a lot about temporary pain, that this will be the cost of saving lives. Greta, when the flow of fentanyl is stopped at our northern and southern borders, how temporary would that pain be before the rest of Donald Trump's policies, presuming that things are all passed and codified on Capitol Hill, are put into effect?
Well, we don't know, in part because we don't know what the asks are on the fentanyl and immigration side. We haven't seen a lot of news come out about the negotiations with Canada and Mexico and what specifically the Trump administration is asking in order to resolve these crises and make a dent on the fentanyl and immigration issues. And then, of course, there is the question of what comes next with respect to reciprocal tariffs and other actions that have either started or have been discussed. And so I think the name of the game for these trading partners and for businesses across the border is uncertainty about what the future holds.
Yeah. Well, just to follow up on that quickly, we heard from the Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, this morning. He said that we need to see material reduction in autopsy deaths from opioids. That is apparently the metric. Based on your experience working with the USTR, how is that made clear, and how can our partners reach a goal like that?
Well, my experience at the U.S. Trade Representative Office, doesn't really shed light onto this, because this is really breaking new ground for this administration. They're using new authorities with a new rationale in the trade space, sort of crossing over between what we normally think of as law enforcement issues, public health issues, and tying them to trade tools. And in this case, it's a question how, what's tied directly to our trade relationships with Canada and Mexico, and what may not be. And so, that, again, it just raises a question of how, as you put it, how do you measure? What's the outcome? How do you know that this is successful in addressing these issues? And what are the actions that they're really looking for here?
Well, I'm glad, Greta, that you raise the authorities with which the president is taking this action. We've heard both Canada, through Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister, as well as China, suggest that they will be challenging these measures at the World Trade Organization. Could this be overturned through that mechanism? How binding would any WTO findings be? Is there a question around whether President Trump actually has the ability to continue enforcing this?
So yes, I saw the statements around WTO action. At this stage, bringing claims at the World Trade Organization, in some respects, it's symbolic. What the World Trade Organization does through dispute settlement is give trading partners the sort of green light to retaliate for trade actions. Canada is already moving forward with its retaliation. Mexico's doing so as well. So you can see that they're not waiting for those outcomes. They may still go ahead at the WTO to make the point that, in their view, these are inconsistent. The Trump administration may have arguments that there's exceptions that allow them to take this type of action, and we'll have to see how that plays out.
As we spend time with Greta, I want to remind our viewers and listeners we have an important conversation on the way from Bloomberg Invest with Gary Cohn, Vice Chair of IBM. We're only a couple of minutes away from that. I'd be curious to hear his take on this, Greta. And I want to tap your experience on Capitol Hill, because you are also senior international trade counsel for the U.S. Senate Committee on Finance. And among the legislation that you helped to craft and implement was the Miscellaneous Tariff Bill Act of 2018. Now, you must be smirking a little bit, knowing that the aim of that legislation was to reduce or eliminate tariffs on imported goods. Will lawmakers have any role in this? Will there be any legislation surrounding the implementation of these tariffs, or is this all Donald Trump all the time?
Well, I think the current assessment with this Congress is that it's unlikely they'll be doing anything legislatively to alter the course. It is very difficult to pass trade legislation. They would need to do so on a bipartisan basis, overcoming a potential veto from the president. I think that said, members of Congress will hear rising and continuing concerns from constituents, businesses, exporters, importers, potentially consumers, as these tariffs go into place and as they increase. And that political pressure will start to influence members and, by extension, the White House, potentially.
Well, the White House doesn't seem too influenced by any particular political pressure at this time, as it is standing by its policies here. Also keeping in mind, Greta, that they see this as a means to raise revenue. With the tariff levels on this quantity of imports that we're dealing with now, $1.5 trillion worth from our three largest trading partners, with the potential for reciprocal tariffs, with the Commerce Secretary suggesting that could be another several $100 billion raised. How does this mathematically work when looking at what it's going to do to the coffers of the United States Treasury?
Well, certainly it will increase the tariff revenue. You have to, when you're estimating out the revenue collection from tariffs, you have to take into account the fact that imports will likely go down. So it's not going to be 25% on the current level of trade continuing forever, because presumably the current level of imports will go down as those imports become more expensive. And I think that that's part of the objectives that the administration is looking for. So it will be a revenue raiser. I think it's a question of, do the tariffs stay in place in their current form? Is the administration able to maintain that politically? And will the trade stay at this level, or will it decrease in a way that really diminishes the amount of tariff collection that results?
I know it's all about Canada today, Greta, but I am interested that no one's talking about China very much. Donald Trump said he didn't expect Beijing to retaliate too much, were his words, but we've got quite the retaliation, up to 15% on a bunch of farm products here, including soybeans, meat, and grains. Are food prices going up?
Well, we'll see. It's interesting because China did take strong retaliation, but of course, compared to what the tariffs have been put in place so far, I mean, we've put in place tariffs now just in this most recent action on over $400 billion worth of imports. And China is retaliating with targeted tariffs on key agricultural product in the tens of billions, right? But with real impact on those sectors. That will cause pain in certain congressional districts in certain parts of the country. It will be another cost of this policy.